The mess hall of Horizon Ring was the loudest place on the station. Every species that traveled through this part of space stopped here to eat, to argue, to trade, and to watch each other with suspicious eyes. The ceiling was high and curved, built to hold the noise of 100 different languages spoken at once. Long metal tables stretched across the floor in rows, and at any given hour, most of them were full. The Korath sat in their heavy armor, eating with their helmets off and their scarred faces open to the air. The Peluni clustered together in groups of 6 or 7, their thin blue fingers picking at food trays with delicate care. The Tauron officers kept to their corner, speaking in low voices, their dark uniforms pressed and perfect. And the humans sat in their own modest section near the kitchen, laughing too loud and stealing food from each other's trays the way they always did. Every table had bodies, except one. In the far corner of the mess hall, a single figure sat alone at a table meant for 8. The 3 tables around her were also empty. No one sat there. No one even walked close. The aliens passing by gave that corner a wide look, and then turned their eyes away, the way a person might look at a fire burning in the middle of a road, and decide to take a different path. Her name was Rihala. She was Velathi. She was tall, even while sitting. Her skin was the color of pale violet, smooth and hard, like polished stone. Her face was sharp, with high-ridged cheekbones that caught the light of the mess hall in thin white lines. She had 4 eyes, 2 large and 2 smaller ones set just above them, and all 4 of them were the color of dark iron. Her hair, if it could be called hair, was a fall of thick silver-white threads, pulled back from her face and tied at the base of her neck. Along her forearms, faint raised lines ran beneath the skin, like veins made of bone. They were not veins. They were blades, retractable, fast, deadly. Every species on Horizon Ring knew what the Velathi were. The stories were taught to children on 100 different worlds. A single Velathi soldier had once killed 40 armed Korath warriors with nothing but her bare hands during a boarding action in the Reth corridor. The Velathi did not need weapons. They were weapons. Their reflexes were 4 times faster than most species. Their bone blades could cut through light combat armor. Their senses could detect a heartbeat from across a room. The Galactic Council had classified them as Apex Threat Class 9. Most stations banned them entirely. Rihala was only here because of a thin, fragile diplomatic agreement that nobody liked and everyone wanted to end. So she sat alone, every meal, every day. For over a year. She ate slowly, her 4 eyes fixed on her tray, and she did not look up. She had learned not to look up. When she looked up, people flinched. When she looked up, people left. It was easier to keep her eyes down and let them forget she was there, even though they never really forgot. The door to the mess hall opened, and Yoon Taeho walked in. He was not impressive to look at. He was average height for a human male, with a lean build and hands that were permanently stained with grease and carbon dust, no matter how many times he washed them. His dark hair was messy and pushed to one side, and his engineering jumpsuit had a long streak of sealant foam dried across the left shoulder from the hull repair he had just finished. He looked tired. He had spent the last 9 hours crawling through maintenance tunnels, sealing microfractures in the station's outer shell, and his knees ached, and his back was stiff, and he wanted to sit down more than he wanted to eat. He grabbed a tray from the counter, loaded it with whatever the kitchen was serving, and turned to find a seat. The mess hall was packed. Every human table was full. His usual spot next to Doha was taken by a supply officer who had spread her documents across the entire bench. The Peluni section had open seats, but the last human who sat there had accidentally offended them by breathing too loud, and Taeho did not feel like navigating alien etiquette tonight. He scanned left, scanned right, and his eyes landed on the empty corner. The Velathi woman, sitting alone. 4 empty tables around her, like a quarantine zone. A hand grabbed his elbow. "No," said Doha. Doha was Taeho's closest friend on the station. He was shorter, rounder, and had the kind of face that always looked slightly worried, even when he was happy. Right now, he looked very worried. "That is a Velothi," Doha said, keeping his voice low. "You know what they are, right? She could take your head off before you even see her move." Taeho looked at the empty tables. Then he looked at Rahala. She was eating alone, her silver-white hair falling slightly forward, her 4 eyes on her food. She did not look like a monster. She looked like someone who was very used to being alone. "I need a seat," Taeho said. "You need your head attached to your body," Doha said. Taeho pulled his elbow free gently and walked across the mess hall. He felt the room change as he moved. Conversations did not stop, but they got quieter. Eyes followed him. A Korath soldier nudged his companion and pointed. A Paluni turned all 3 of her heads to watch. Even the Tauron officers in their dark corner looked up from their low conversation. Taeho reached the empty table. He stood across from Rihala. She did not look up, but he saw the faint lines along her forearms shift beneath her skin. A reflex, an automatic response to something coming close. Her bone blades were ready, even if she was not. He set his tray down on the table. The sound was small, just metal on metal, but in the silence that had fallen over that corner of the mess hall, it was very loud. Rihala looked up. All 4 of her dark iron eyes locked onto him. Her face showed nothing. No anger, no welcome, no surprise. Just a flat, careful emptiness that Taeho recognized. It was the face of someone who had been hurt enough times that they had stopped showing anything at all. Taeho sat down. He picked up his fork, looked at the gray paste on his tray that the kitchen called dinner, and said, "Long shift?" Rihala did not answer. She stared at him for a long time. 10 seconds, 20. Her bone blades shifted once more under her skin, then slowly settled flat. The mess hall was still quiet around them. Taeho could feel every eye in the room on his back. He ignored it. He put a forkful of gray paste in his mouth, chewed, and made a face. "This is terrible," he said, to no one in particular. Rihala still said nothing, but she did not move. She did not stand up and leave. She did not bare her blades. She just watched him with her 4 iron eyes, and something very small shifted behind them. Something that might have been confusion. Something that might have been the beginning of a question she did not know how to ask. "Why are you here?" Taeho ate his terrible food. Rihala sat across from him. The mess hall slowly filled with noise again, like water flowing back into a space it had briefly left empty. And for the first time in over a year, Rihala was not sitting alone. Taeho did not make a plan out of it. He did not wake up each morning and tell himself that today he would sit with the Velothi woman again. It just happened the way simple things happen. The seat was open. He was tired. The food was bad no matter where he sat, so he might as well sit somewhere quiet. 3 days after the first time, he sat across from her again. Rihala looked up when he set his tray down, and this time her bone blades did not shift under her skin. She watched him for a few seconds, then returned to her food without a word. Taeho ate in silence beside her, and it was comfortable the way silence can be when 2 people agree not to force it into something else. 5 days after that, he sat down and said, "The water recycler on Deck 9 broke again. 3rd time this month. I think the station is trying to kill us slowly with bad water instead of all at once." Rihala said nothing for a long moment. Then, without looking up from her tray, she said, "The filtration membrane is installed backward." Taeho stopped chewing. "What?" "Your Deck 9 recycler. The filtration membrane. It is reversed. The flow direction is wrong. That is why it fails." Taeho stared at her. He had spent 2 hours that morning fighting with that recycler, and she had just solved the problem in 1 sentence while eating lunch. "How do you know that?" he asked. "I can hear it," Rahala said. "The pump cycles at the wrong interval. The sound is different when the membrane is reversed." She could hear a water pump 3 decks away through the walls of a space station. Taeho filed this information away calmly, the way he filed away all strange and wonderful things, and said, "Thank you. That would have taken me another week to figure out." Rahala looked at him then. She seemed to be searching for something in his face, some hidden reaction, fear maybe, or disgust at what her senses could do. She found nothing but honest gratitude, and she looked away again. That was how it started. Over the next 2 weeks, Taeho sat with Rahala more often than not. He did not force conversation. Some days he talked about small things, the repairs he was working on, the argument Doha had gotten into with a supply clerk, the strange noise coming from ventilation shaft 12 that no one could identify. Other days he said nothing at all, and they ate together in silence, and that was fine too. Rahala began to respond. At first it was only technical things. She would hear a system malfunction that Taeho had not detected yet, and mention it the way someone might mention the weather. The cooling system on Deck 4 was losing pressure. A structural beam on the outer ring had developed a harmonic vibration at a dangerous frequency. The oxygen mix in the southern corridor was slightly off. She was, Taeho realized, extraordinarily intelligent. Her mind was sharp and fast and detailed, and she noticed everything. Not just sounds, but patterns, systems, connections between things that seemed unrelated. He began bringing his engineering tablet to lunch, and sometimes she would glance at his schematics and point out things that 3 human engineers had missed. Then, slowly, she began to say things that were not about engineering. "Your friend watches us every day," she said once, tilting her head slightly toward the humid section. Taeho looked over his shoulder and saw Doha, pretending very hard not to stare. "He is worried about me," Taeho said. "He should be," Rahala said. But there was something in her voice that had not been there before, something dry and quiet that was almost humor. Other species on the station began to notice. The human engineer who sat with the Velothi was becoming a topic of conversation in every section of Horizon Ring. The Peluni discussed it with fascinated confusion. The Korath thought it was either very brave or very stupid, and could not decide which. The Tauron diplomats watched with cold, careful interest, and said nothing publicly. A Tauron trade representative approached Captain Beck Gina in her office one afternoon. He was polite, the way a knife is polite when it is still inside its sheath. He told Gina that her engineer was engaging in what he called a reckless association with a known threat entity, and that the Tauron hegemony would view any deepening relationship between a human crew member and the Velothi exile as a political statement. Captain Gina was a woman in her late 40s, with a square jaw and steady hands, and a voice that did not bend easily. She thanked the representative for his concern, and showed him the door. Then she called Taeho in. Her office was small and plain, the way all human spaces on the station were. She sat behind her desk, and looked at Taeho standing in front of her, with sealant dust on his boots and engine grease on his collar, and she did not waste time. "You know what you're doing is dangerous," she said. "Yes, Captain." "You know that the hegemony is watching." "Yes, Captain." "You know that she could kill you before your brain even registered the movement." Taeho was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She fixed our Deck 9 recycler problem, and she found the harmonic issue on Beam 7 before it became a hull failure. She has been sitting in that mess hall for over a year, Captain, and she is the most capable engineer I have ever met. And she eats lunch alone every day, because everyone in this station is too afraid to sit near her." Gina studied him. "I am not ordering you to stop," she said. "I am making sure you understand what you are walking into." I understand, Teho said. She is just a person sitting alone. Gina let him go. That night, Teho could not sleep. He went to the observation deck on the upper ring, a long curved room with a transparent wall that looked out into open space. The stars were thick and bright and endless, and the light of a distant nebula painted the floor in shades of soft blue and gold. Rihala was there. She stood near the window with her arms at her sides, looking out at the stars. She did not turn when he entered, but he knew she heard him. She heard everything. He walked over and stood beside her. Close enough. They were quiet for a long time. I was a commander, Rihala said. Her voice was low and even, and she did not look at him. In the Velothi Third Fleet, during the border war with the Tehran hegemony. Teho said nothing. He just listened. There was a colony on the edge of the disputed zone, a small world, mostly farmers, families. They were not soldiers. They were not a threat to anyone. She paused. The raised lines on her forearms were very still. My orders were to clear the colony, all of it. Every person. The hegemony wanted the territory empty. They wanted no witnesses to what they were building in that sector. She turned her head slightly, and two of her 4 eyes found him in the dim light. I refused. The words sat between them, simple and heavy. I refused, and I reported the order to my fleet command, and my fleet command buried it. They stripped my rank. They erased my service record. They told the galaxy I was a deserter and a danger, and they put a mark on me that means every species in known space sees me and thinks monster. She looked back at the stars. The galaxy does not know why I was exiled. They only know what I am. Teho stood beside her in the blue and gold light and let the silence hold the weight of what she had told him. Then he said, "You did the right thing. The right thing does not matter if no one knows the truth." I know, Teho said. Now one person knows. Rihala looked at him fully, all 4 eyes. In the low light of the observation deck, with the stars burning behind her, she looked less like a weapon and more like a woman who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. "You should be afraid of me," she said. Teho met her gaze. "But you have not given me a reason to be." She held his eyes for a long time, and then she looked away, back at the stars, and she said nothing else. But she did not leave, and neither did he. Far below them, in a dark maintenance corridor on the lower ring, a small Toron surveillance drone powered on its transmitter and sent a compressed data packet off station. It contained timestamps, location data, audio fragments, and a simple flag note in Toron military code. The human engineer and the Velothi exile were getting close, closer than the hegemony was comfortable with. Someone, somewhere, would have to do something about that. The Toron ship arrived at Horizon Ring on a Tuesday morning, station time. It was a diplomatic cruiser, long and dark and sharp at the edges, and it docked at the upper port with the quiet confidence of a species that expected every door to open for them. The station's traffic controller logged it as a routine diplomatic visit. It was not routine. Nothing about it was routine. Commandant Ulvek stepped onto the station with 6 officers behind him. He was tall for a Toron, with gray skin pulled tight over a narrow skull, and eyes that were flat and black and showed nothing at all. He wore his uniform like armor, pressed and perfect, every metal in its place, every crease sharp enough to cut. He smiled when he met the station's leadership council, and his smile was the kind that made people feel cold, without understanding why. He told the council that he was here on standard diplomatic business, trade agreements, transit protocols, the usual work that kept interspecies stations running. He spoke calmly and clearly, and he never raised his voice, and every word he said was a lie. Ulvek was here for Rihala. The Toron hegemony had allowed her exile to continue for over a year because she had been irrelevant. A single Velothi, sitting alone on a station, ignored by every species, slowly fading from memory. That was acceptable. That was safe. But the reports from the surveillance drones had changed things. A human was talking to her. A human was sitting with her. A human was listening to her. And the hegemony knew exactly what she might say if someone listened long enough. Rahala knew things. She had been a fleet commander. She had seen the orders. She had seen the plans for the colony that was supposed to be erased. She carried evidence inside her memory that could unravel years of careful political work and expose the hegemony's war crimes to the Galactic Council. As long as she was alone and silent, she was harmless. But if she started talking, if she found someone who believed her, she became the most dangerous person on the station. More dangerous than her bone blades. More dangerous than her Class 9 threat rating. Dangerous in the way that truth is dangerous to people who have built their power on lies. Ulvek requested a meeting with the station council on his second day. He sat at the head of the conference table and folded his gray hands together and made his request in the same calm, polite voice he used for everything. The Velothi exile known as Rahala is a fugitive of the Torhan hegemony, he said. We request that the station remand her into our custody for transport back to hegemony space, where she will face lawful proceedings. The council members shifted in their seats. They were not comfortable with Rahala on the station. Nobody was. A Velothi was a liability, a constant source of tension and fear. Part of them wanted to hand her over and be done with it. But handing over a political exile to the government that exiled her set a precedent that made everyone nervous. If the hegemony could reach into a neutral station and take back anyone they wanted, then no one on Horizon Ring was truly safe. The council asked for time to consider the request. Ovek smiled his cold smile and said he understood completely. He was a patient man. He could wait. He had no intention of waiting. Rahala felt the change before anyone told her. She felt it the way a soldier feels a shift in the air before a battle, a tightness in the atmosphere, a wrongness in the rhythm of the station around her. She stopped coming to the mess hall. She stayed in her quarters on the lower ring, and she kept her bone blades half extended beneath her skin at all times, ready, alert, waiting. Teho noticed her absence on the first day. He sat at their usual table alone, and ate his food, and looked at the empty seat across from him, and felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. On the second day, he went looking for her. He found her in her quarters. The room was small and bare, with nothing personal in it. No decorations, no comforts, just a bunk and a storage unit, and the faint hum of the station's life support. Rahala was standing near the wall with her back to the door, and when he knocked and entered, she turned and he saw that her face had changed. The careful emptiness was gone. In its place was something harder and older and more tired. You should not be here, she said. You are not at lunch, Teho said. A Toran commandant arrived yesterday. I know why he is here. He is here for me. Teho leaned against the doorframe. What will he do? He will try to take me. If the station will not hand me over willingly, he will find another way. The hegemony does not make requests. They give orders that look like requests, and when the answer is no, they find quieter methods. She turned to face him fully. All four of her iron eyes were sharp and focused. Teho, this is not your fight. If you are near me when they come, they will kill you to remove a witness. You are nothing to them, a human engineer. They will not even file a report. Teho did not move from the doorframe. He looked at her standing in her bare room, alone again the way she had been alone for a year, and he thought about the observation deck, and the stars, and the story she had told him about the colony she refused to destroy. He thought about how she had laughed at nothing yet, not once in all the time he had known her. Humans have a saying, he said. You do not have to face it alone. That is a foolish saying. Most human sayings are, you will get yourself killed. Maybe. But not today. Rihala stared at him. He could see the conflict in her. The part of her that wanted to push him out the door, and seal it shut. And another part, smaller and quieter, that was so tired of standing alone in empty rooms. She did not push him out. 3 days later, the quiet method came. It happened at night, station time, when the corridors were dim and the crew rotations were thin. A section of the lower ring near HFY's quarters experienced a sudden hull breach. Alarms screamed. Emergency lights flooded the corridor in red. Air began to rush toward the crack in the outer wall, with a sound like a living thing gasping. Taeho was on duty in the engineering hub, 2 decks above, when the alert came in. He pulled up the breach data on his terminal, and his hands went still on the controls. The breach was in a section that he had personally inspected 4 days ago. The hull in that area had been solid. No fractures, no stress points, no material fatigue. For a breach to appear there now, in that specific location, 3 corridors away from HFY's quarters, was not an accident. Someone had cut the hull from the inside. He sealed the breach remotely, rerouting emergency pressure systems to stabilize the section, and then he pulled up the maintenance logs. The records showed that a routine inspection team had accessed that corridor 6 hours ago. The team ID codes belonged to station maintenance, but when Taeho cross-referenced them against the duty roster, the codes did not match any crew on shift. Someone had used false identification to get into the corridor and sabotage the hull. Taeho sat in the engineering hub and stared at the data on his screen. His heart was beating faster now, not with fear, but with a cold, focused clarity that settled over him the way it always did when a system was failing and he had to find the problem before everything came apart. He saved the data. He copied it to a secure file. Then he contacted Captain Gina on a private channel and told her what he had found. Gina's voice was tight and controlled. "You are certain?" "The hull was clean 4 days ago, Captain. Someone cut it." A long pause. Then Gina said, "I will handle the politics, you handle the engineering, and Taeho, keep your head down." But Taeho had no intention of keeping his head down, not anymore. He left the engineering hub and went to HFY's quarters. She was awake, standing in the center of her room, with her bone blades fully extended for the first time he had ever seen. They were long and curved, and pale as old ivory, emerging from the lines along her forearms like something that had always been there, waiting beneath the surface. She looked at him when he entered, and her 4 eyes were the eyes of a soldier. "The breach was staged," she said. "It was not a question." "Yes," Taeho said. "They are coming for you." He stood in her doorway, a human engineer with grease on his hands, and no weapons, and no armor, and no training for what was about to happen. And he said, "I have a plan." HFY looked at him. "You are an engineer." "Yes." "Not a soldier." "No." "Then what kind of plan can you possibly have?" Taeho smiled. It was a small, tired, stubborn smile. The kind of smile that humans make when they have decided to do something that everyone else would call impossible. "An engineer's plan," he said. Taeho had lived on Horizon Ring for 2 years. In that time, he had crawled through every maintenance tunnel, sealed every microfracture, replaced every worn conduit, and memorized every pressure seal on the lower 3 decks. He knew the station the way a person knows their own body, not just the bones and the skin, but the blood and the breath, the way it moved, the way it sounded when something was wrong. Other engineers used schematics. Taeho used instinct. He could feel when a corridor was pulling too much air. He could hear when a power relay was cycling half a second too slow. Horizon Ring was not his weapon. It was his home, and he knew every corner of it. He worked through the night. Doha found him in the secondary engineering bay at 3 in the morning, station time, hunched over a terminal with 4 different system maps open on the screen, and his fingers moving fast across the controls. "What are you doing?" Doha asked. He was wearing his sleep clothes, and his hair was flat on one side. and he looked like a man who had woken up with a bad feeling, and followed it down 3 decks to find his best friend doing something insane. Tejo did not look up. "I need your help." "My help with what?" "The hegemony is going to send a team for Rahala. Tonight, maybe tomorrow. I need to stop them." Doa stood very still for a long moment. Then he pulled up a chair and sat down beside Tejo, and said, "Tell me what you need." That was the thing about Doa. He was afraid of almost everything. He worried constantly. He made nervous jokes in dangerous situations, and he slept with a light on, because the darkness of space outside the hull made him uneasy. But when Tejo needed him, he sat down, every time. Tejo explained his plan, and Doha listened. And then Doha asked questions. And then they argued about the details, in the quiet, focused way that engineers argue when the stakes are real. The plan was simple in concept, and complicated in execution. Tejo could not fight the hegemony's operatives. He was not a soldier. He had no weapons, no combat training, no armor. But he did not need any of those things, because the hegemony's operatives would be moving through his station, and every system on that station answered to his terminal. He moved Rihala to a secure maintenance room on the lower ring, a room with thick walls and only 2 access corridors. Then he mapped every possible route from the upper docking ports to that room, 14 corridors and 6 junction points, and he tied each one to a different system override on his engineering terminal. Blast doors, pressure locks, ventilation controls, gravity generators, fire suppression systems, lighting grids. All of them connected, all of them waiting. Captain Gina contacted him on a private channel at midday. Her voice was careful and measured. "I cannot officially support what you are doing," she said. "Do you understand?" "Yes, Captain." There was a pause. Then she sent him a file. Inside were clearance codes for the station's emergency override systems, codes that only senior officers were supposed to have. Tejo looked at them on his screen and understood what Gina was telling him without words. She could not stand beside him, but she could leave the door open. "Thank you, Captain," he said. "Do not get killed," she said. "I do not want to fill out that paperwork." The hegemony moved that night. Tejo was at his terminal in the secondary engineering bay when his sensors picked up the movement. 6 figures in light combat armor entered the lower ring through a maintenance hatch on the port side. Their armor was Tehran standard, dark gray with sealed helmets and built-in short-range weapons. They moved in a tight formation, fast and quiet, and they followed a route that led directly toward Rihala's position. 6 Tehran operatives, armed, armored, trained for exactly this kind of operation. Against them, 1 human engineer with a terminal and a wrench. Tejo took a breath, then he went to work. The first 2 operatives entered Corridor 7. Tejo watched them on the maintenance cameras, 2 gray shapes moving through the dim light. And when they reached the junction point, he entered the first command. The blast doors at both ends of the corridor slammed shut with a sound like thunder. The 2 operatives spun, weapons raised, and found themselves sealed in a 30-meter box of metal with no way out. 2 down, Tejo said quietly. The remaining 4 operatives heard the blast doors and adjusted their route. They split into pairs and took separate corridors, trying to flank around the sealed section. Tejo watched them move on his screen and felt the calm focus settle deeper into his chest. They were thinking like soldiers. He was thinking like a plumber. The first pair entered Corridor 12. Tejo cut the gravity. It happened instantly. One moment they were running in formation, the next they were floating, their boots lifting off the floor, their arms spreading wide as their bodies lost all sense of direction. Their weapons drifted away from their hands, their sealed helmets filled with the sound of their own confused breathing. Tehran operatives were trained for zero gravity. A training and reality are different things. And by the time they oriented themselves and grabbed hold of the wall, Tejo had sealed the corridor behind them and vented non-lethal gas through the ventilation system. Within 30 seconds, Both operatives were unconscious, floating gently in the dark like gray fish in a tank. 4 down, Tejo said. The last pair was smarter. They stopped moving. They found a junction room and held position, and one of them began working on the wall panel, trying to override the local systems and cut Tejo out. They were not bad at it. Tehran operatives had basic technical training, and the one working the panel was fast. But basic technical training against a man who had spent 2 years inside these walls was not a fair contest. Tejo rerouted the power grid. The junction room went dark. Then he activated the fire suppression system, and the room filled with thick white foam that blinded them, coated their helmet visors, and clogged the joints of their armor. He heard them cursing over the maintenance audio, muffled and furious, and then he sealed the room and locked it. 6 down, Tejo said. He leaned back in his chair and let out a breath that had been sitting in his lungs for a very long time. Then the alarm on his screen blinked red. He looked at it, and his stomach dropped. There had not been 6 operatives. There had been 7. The 7th had not come through the maintenance hatch with the others. The 7th had entered from below, through the waste processing tunnels, a route that was not on any standard map and was not covered by Tejo's sensor grid. The 7th was already in the corridor, outside Rahala's room. Tejo grabbed his wrench and ran. He was 3 decks away. The corridors were long, and his legs were tired, and his heart was hammering against his ribs. He ran the way a man runs when he knows he might be too late, with everything he had, holding nothing back. He was too late. But Rihala did not need him to be on time. The 7th operative breached the door to the maintenance room and found Rihala waiting for him. She stood in the center of the room with her bone blades extended, long and curved and pale in the emergency lighting, and her 4 iron eyes were steady and calm and ancient, in a way that made the operative hesitate for just 1 moment. 1 moment was all she needed. She moved. The operative did not see her move. One instant she was standing 3 meters away. The next she was inside his guard, past his weapon, her blade pressed against the seal of his helmet where the armor met the neck joint. She could have cut. She could have pushed the blade through the gap and ended him in less than a second. It would have been easy. It would have been what the galaxy expected of Velothi to do. She did not cut. She twisted, hooked her blade under the chest plate of his armor, and slammed him sideways into the wall. The impact cracked the metal panel behind him. She pinned him there, one blade holding his weapon arm flat against the wall, the other resting against his throat. And she held him the way a person holds a door shut, with force but without violence, with control but without cruelty. The operative stopped struggling. He had no choice. He was held by something stronger than him in every way, and the only reason he was still alive was because she had decided he would be. Tejo arrived 30 seconds later, out of breath, his wrench in his hand, his face red and his chest heaving. He saw Rihala holding the operative against the wall. He saw her bone blades out, and her 4 eyes burning, and her silver-white hair loose around her shoulders. He saw the Tehran soldier pinned and breathing hard, and very much alive. He looked at the operative. He looked at Rihala. "I think we are behind schedule on the maintenance report," he said. Rihala looked at him. She looked at this small, tired, unarmed human standing in the doorway with a wrench, breathing like he had run a race. And something broke open behind her 4 iron eyes, something that had been sealed shut for a very long time. She laughed. It was not a big laugh. It was short and quiet and rough, like a sound that had forgotten how to be made. But it was real. It was the first time she had laughed in longer than she could remember. Tejo grinned at her. His chest was still heaving, and his hands were shaking, and he was fairly sure his legs were about to give out. But he grinned, and she looked at his stupid, brave human grin, and she felt something shift inside her that she did not have a name for. By morning, It was over. Captain Gina and station security arrived with the evidence Tejo had compiled. The sabotaged hull data, the false maintenance codes, the sensor logs of the kill team. Commandant Ulvek was called before the station council. And this time there were no polite smiles and no careful words. The council formally expelled the hegemony delegation from Horizon Ring with immediate effect. Ulvek stood in the docking port as his team was escorted back to their ship. His flat black eyes found Tejo in the gathered crowd, and he held the human's gaze for a long moment. "This is not over," Ulvek said. His voice was calm and even and cold. "One human engineer cannot protect her forever." Tejo met his eyes and said nothing. He did not need to. He had already given his answer, in sealed corridors and disabled gravity and fire suppression foam. In every system on the station that had answered his command. The answer was simple. Watch me try. The story spread the way all good stories spread on a space station. It started with the people who had been there. The security officers who had found 6 Tehran operatives sealed in corridors like cargo and shipping containers. The maintenance crew who had cleaned up the fire suppression foam. The night shift workers who had heard the blast doors slam shut and wondered what was happening below their feet. They told the people who had not been there, and those people told others. And by the time the Tehran ship undocked and pulled away from Horizon Ring, every species on the station had heard some version of what had happened. The versions were not all the same. Stories never are. In some versions, Tejo had fought the operatives hand to hand. In others, he had built a weapon from spare parts. In one version that Tejo suspected Doha was responsible for, he had rewired the entire station in 30 minutes while drinking coffee with one hand. The details changed, but the core of the story stayed the same. A single unarmed human engineer had stopped a Tauron kill squad using nothing but his knowledge of the station and his refusal to step aside. The aliens on Horizon Ring did not know what to do with this information. Humans had always been considered a middle species, not weak, but not strong, not stupid, but not brilliant. They were social and noisy, and they ate strange food, and they laughed too loud, and they had a strange habit of forming attachments to anything that stayed still long enough, including species that could kill them without effort. The galaxy tolerated humans the way a neighborhood tolerates a family that is friendly and a little odd, and keeps inviting everyone to dinner. But the story of the engineer and the Valathi changed something. It did not make the other species afraid of humans. It made them uncertain, and in the world of interspecies politics, uncertainty was more powerful than fear. The whisper moved through the trade routes, and the docking bays, and the diplomatic channels. Humans do not abandon their people. They do not step aside when someone they care about is in danger. And if you threaten someone they have decided to protect, they will turn your own house against you. They will use your walls and your doors and your air and your gravity, and they will take apart your operation with a wrench and a maintenance terminal, and they will do it calmly, without hatred, without cruelty, because humans do not fight to destroy, they fight to keep. Commandant Ulvek returned to Hegemony Space and filed his report. The report was classified, but the failure was not. The Hegemony had sent an armed team to retrieve one exile and had been stopped by one engineer. The political cost was significant. Other species began asking questions about why the Hegemony wanted Rihala so badly. What was she carrying that was worth this much effort? What had she seen that they needed to keep buried? Captain Gina understood the opportunity. She was a practical woman, and she knew that the truth was only useful if it arrived at the right moment. She worked with Tejo and with Rihala carefully over several days to prepare a document. It contained Rihala's testimony about the colony, about the order to destroy it, about the Hegemony's plans for the disputed zone. It did not contain classified military details that could be used as weapons. It contained only the truth, plain and clear and terrible, about what had been ordered and what Her.HFY had refused to do. Gina sent the document through diplomatic channels to the Galactic Council, to independent media networks, to the offices of species who had long suspected the hegemony of crimes, but had never had a witness willing to speak. The response was slow at first, then it was not. Her.HFY sat in her quarters and listened to the communications traffic on her personal terminal, and heard her own name spoken by voices she had never met, on worlds she had never visited, in languages she did not speak. She heard people arguing about her, defending her, questioning the hegemony, demanding investigations. She heard the truth moving through the galaxy the way water moves through a cracked dam, finding every gap, pushing every weakness, refusing to be stopped. She sat very still, and she breathed very carefully, and she did not know what to feel. For over a year, she had been a monster, a threat, a thing to be avoided. Now she was something else, something she had not been in a long time. She was a person who had done the right thing, and the galaxy was finally being told. Tejo found her on the observation deck that evening. It had become their place, the long curved room with the transparent wall and the stars burning outside. She was standing where she always stood, near the window, and the light of the nebula painted her violet skin in shades of blue and gold. He stood beside her, and they looked at the stars together. "How are you?" he asked. Her.HFY thought about the question. Not the polite version of the question, but the real one. How are you? How are you after a year of silence and exile and fear, after being hunted in the place where you were supposed to be safe, after hearing your name spoken by strangers who are learning the truth for the first time? "I do not know," she said. And it was honest, and it was enough. They were quiet for a while. Then Her.HFY said, "The human contingent has offered me asylum." "I heard. It is a small section of the station. Your people control very little here." "We control enough," Tejo said. Her.HFY looked at him. "No species has ever offered a Velothi protection before." "Then we are the first. Humans like being first. It is one of our many problems." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost, and that was more than she had given anyone in a very long time. "Why did you sit down?" she asked. "That first day, in the mess hall. Why?" Tejo thought about it. He thought about the crowded room and the empty tables, and the alien woman sitting alone, with her 4 iron eyes and her silver-white hair, and the blades hidden beneath her skin. He thought about how every other person in that room had looked at her and seen a threat, and how he had looked at her and seen a person eating lunch by herself. "You looked like you needed someone to not be afraid of you," he said. Her.HFY held his gaze. Her 4 eyes were steady and deep, and full of something that had been growing slowly over the past weeks. Something that had started as confusion, and become curiosity, and become trust, and become something she still did not have a name for. "Among the Velothi," she said, "there is no word for what you did, sitting beside someone who is dangerous. Not to fight them, not to challenge them, not to prove anything, just to be with them." She paused. "Humans might be the strangest species in the galaxy." "I will take that as a compliment," Tejo said. "It is one." She looked at his smile, and felt the last locked thing inside her chest open quietly, like a door that had been sealed for so long it had forgotten it could move. 3 weeks later, the mess hall was loud and crowded, the way it always was. The Korath ate with their helmets off. The Piluni picked at their trays with delicate fingers. The Turan section was smaller now, quieter, and the officers there kept their eyes on their own food and did not look around. Tejo sat at his usual table in the far corner, with his tray of terrible food and his engineering tablet propped against the salt container. Her.HFY sat across from him, eating slowly, occasionally glancing at his schematics and pointing out a flaw in his calculations with the dry, sharp precision that he had come to rely on. Doha sat beside Tejo. He was nervous, the way he was always nervous, and he kept glancing at Her.HFY's forearms, where the bone blades rested beneath the skin. but he was there. He was trying very hard to make small talk. "So," Doha said to Rihala, "do you ever, accidentally extend those in your sleep?" Rihala looked at him with all four eyes. "No." "Right. Good. That is good. Very reassuring." "But I have been told I talk in my sleep," Rihala said, in Valathi battle language. "It has been described as extremely terrifying." Doha's face went pale. Teho grinned. Rihala's expression did not change, but two of her four eyes carried the faintest light of amusement, and Teho recognized it now. He knew what her humor looked like. It looked like nothing at all, unless you knew where to look. Then a fourth chair moved. They all looked up. A young Paluni engineer, barely out of training, stood beside the table, holding her tray with two of her three hands. Her blue skin was flushed darker at the edges, which meant she was nervous. She looked at Rihala. She looked at Teho. She swallowed. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. Teho looked at Rihala. Rihala looked at the young Paluni. Then she moved her tray slightly to the side, making room, and said nothing, which was Rihala's way of saying yes. The Paluni sat down. Doha introduced himself. Teho offered her a piece of bread that was only slightly stale. Rihala told her that the ventilation system above Deck 6 was running at the wrong frequency, and she should probably report it before it became a problem, which was Rihala's way of being welcoming. The table that had been empty for a year was filling. Across the mess hall, other species watched. A Korath soldier leaned over to his companion and said something low. A trade negotiator from the outer systems paused with her drink halfway to her mouth and stared. A group of junior diplomats whispered to each other and glanced at the corner table, where a human, a Valathi, another human, and a Paluni were eating lunch together, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. And perhaps it was. Perhaps that was the point. Humans did not conquer the galaxy with warships. They did not dominate with technology or overwhelm with numbers. They did something much simpler and much stranger. They walked into rooms they were told to avoid. They sat in chairs that everyone else had abandoned. They looked at the most dangerous woman in known space and saw a person eating alone. And they said the most powerful words any species could say. "Is this seat taken?" And the galaxy slowly, one chair at a time, began to change.